The point I've been trying to make, and had been doing this when I was a local prosecutor too, as you pointed out, is you need long-term partnerships between state, local, and federal law enforcement. The military is not helpful in this front because they're not trained on how to help with civilian law enforcement. So, in fact, they can get in the way and create problems.
Yeah.
For example, they're not trained in how to do Mirandize suspects or when you're supposed to do it.
Right.
They're not trained in chain of custody or how to collect evidence. So you could actually have constitutional scenarios where evidence gets thrown out in very serious cases like rapes and murders. And the excessive force piece is of concern too. So regular civilian law enforcement is trained in how to de-escalate situations, and they've got alternative measures. It's not just go to the gun. They've got pepper spray and tasers and the like. The guys here in D.C. and where they're deploying them across the country are carrying M4s in some instances.
Right.
Super high powerful assault weapons that can really kill it with accuracy from 800 yards.
Wow.
And so if you shoot somebody, even if you hit the right guy first, the bullet's going to go through that person. And if you're in a scenario where there's other people around, you could have innocent bystanders get killed too.
Well, maybe that's why the National Guard troops have spent a lot of time picking up garbage and doing other things around here, running checkpoints and so forth. But D.C. is one thing.
Yeah.
We're the federal city. The president's got a lot of leeway here.
Right.
What happens when you roll into Memphis and a mayor who says you're not welcome?
Yeah, I think there's an issue there. Chicago and Baltimore have raised concerns too, for the reasons that we were just talking about. But I think there are going to be legal challenges if he tries to
Posse
do that.
comitatus.
Yeah, I think that's for sure. So, we'll see how it plays out. But the bottom line, though, is if he really wanted to try and do things to reduce crime, I think most of these cities would welcome like additional FBI agents, DEA, ATF, to help reduce the burdens that they have on local law enforcement, local police.
So use the federal agencies, not the National Guard, is your point.
Yeah, I mean, I used to do that when I was state's attorney. We didn't have the resources, for example, to do a wiretap.
Yeah.
You got a long-term issue like that. We'd ask the feds to come in and help. And they had the resources to do it. Sometimes for long-term prosecutions, there's something called RICO, which is a specific federal statute you can use to prosecute federal criminal organizations. We had one where we did it with to bring down MS-13. The local U.S. attorney at that time was Rod Rosenstein, the guy who ended up being Donald Trump's acting attorney general for a time period. But it was a successful joint prosecution. It was nonpartisan. It was effective. And I think that's what these cities would like to see from the federal government.
Really interesting. I'll throw another log on the fire here with regard to your resume. You were also on the commission, congressional commission that investigated the attempted assassination of President Trump.
Right.
We're dealing with a heck of a story here. Terrible tragedy with Charlie Kirk, and we have an arrest today.
Right.
The President of the United States announced the death and announced the arrest. The FBI director at one point mistakenly announced that there had been an arrest. What do you make of this whole process so far? Kash Patel says this was historic, 33 hours, and they've got a guy in cuffs.
I mean, look, I think it's important to not have the political officials get too far out in front of law enforcement, especially while the investigation's ongoing. I think the local governor, Cox, who is a Republican, was much more restrained and also much more accurate. When Patel came out and announced they had a suspect that they'd arrested and then had to back up because it was an incorrect statement. That's kind of embarrassing, but it also undermined the ongoing investigation because people think, oh, they got the suspect. We don't have to keep looking around anymore.
Yes, right.
So, they should just tone that down, let the investigation go forward. I know they've hollowed out a lot of, experienced Department of Justice and FBI agents. They still have some talent, though, there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Let those folks lead the way. Let the career agents and prosecutors lead this. Step back politically and let that process go forward.
Well, it's brought about a whole other conversation, and it's probably a much more difficult and complicated one about political violence. And this is something that you spent a lot of time on with President Trump's case. When you consider the other tragic events that we've seen over the past year, the arson attack against Governor Shapiro, the murder, the shooting deaths of 2 politicians and the wounding of 2 others in Minnesota, Nancy Pelosi's husband, you were reaching for greater conclusions in that commission. And I wonder your thoughts on this now with new calls again for lawmakers like you to get a security detail.
Well, one of the challenges there was that the Secret Service was already spread too thin.
With regard to Butler.
Yeah. So, with respect to the president and other presidential candidates, we wanted to focus the resources there. But they also have executive protection when foreign leaders come here to the United States, for example, UN meetings. So there are going to be challenges in giving all of us that level of protection. And even for the president, there can be limits. But look, at the end of the day, I think some of the immediate steps we can take, tone down the rhetoric, let's come together in a bipartisan way. That doesn't mean we stop disagreeing on partisan issues or political issues or policy issues, but we don't have to sort of try and blame everything on the other guy in a way that inflames people who are at the extremes of the American political spectrum.
Well, we're seeing that already. President Trump said we need to beat the hell out of the radical left. That was a direct quote from the White House driveway yesterday. And he tried to delineate on Fox and Friends this morning between extremism on the right, he said, is just trying to stop crime. Extremism on the left is causing it. You're right in the middle of this, Congressman. And some of your colleagues are rescheduling public events and moving outdoor events inside for this weekend. How are you feeling? Jared Moskowitz said that everyone's scared to death in that building.
Well, there's a lot of concern for sure, and I think people are sort of thinking about, are there additional steps we could take to protect ourselves?
Do you worry about retribution?
Well, I was a former prosecutor, so, who knows, I guess, is the bottom line on that front. And a lot of times these cases, you try and look at the motives behind people who were trying to shoot, like the guy in Butler who tried to assassinate Mr. Trump. I don't think it's ever been really made clear fully what motivated him. And a lot of these people have mental health issues.
Sure. And
so sometimes, we're not going to get good answers is the bottom line. I think the key piece, though, is to try and figure out a way, regardless of how you feel about the Second Amendment, there's got to be a way to keep these high-powered weapons out of the hands of people who have red flags and mental health issues.
Before you leave us, I want to ask you about your plans for Monday to reintroduce the George Floyd and Policing Act. This is the latest in a number of attempts to see action here. Do you have the votes?
Probably not, but we want to make sure we try and push it forward. It's passed the House twice before, and this is a tough era right now, for example, with the Republicans controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House, and pretty much the Supreme Court, too. But I think it's important for us to make sure we keep the push, going, and also to make sure that as, the president rolls out these militarized forces into cities, that we make sure we remind his administration in the country that there's a right way to do policing, that there are limits on, especially for the use of force and the like. And we need to try and follow those constitutional limits, no matter how you feel about what's going on in a particular town. The Constitution always applies.